Welcome back, true crime enthusiasts, to another spine-tingling episode of Unsolved Mysteries. Today, we dive into the dark and chilling case of the Raincoat Killer, a ruthless serial murderer who preyed on wealthy seniors. Join us as we journey through this terrifying tale, piecing together the evidence and attempting to unmask the monster behind the raincoat. Our story begins in a quiet, affluent neighborhood, where residents thought they were safe from the horrors of the outside world. Little did they know that a predator was lurking in their midst, targeting the elderly and vulnerable. In the early 2000s, a series of gruesome murders shocked this community. The victims were all elderly, well-to-do individuals, living seemingly peaceful lives. But one by one, they met a horrifying fate at the hands of a merciless killer. Our first victim was Eleanor Douglas, a 73-year-old widow living alone in her sprawling mansion. Eleanor was known for her philanthropic work, but her generosity would lead to her demise. On a cold, rainy night, Eleanor opened her door to what she believed was a charitable solicitor seeking donations for a local shelter. Little did she know that this seemingly innocent visitor was the harbinger of her doom. Eleanor's life was snuffed out mercilessly, and her house became the scene of a gruesome crime. The killer left no stone unturned, but the police were baffled by the lack of evidence. As the body count continued to rise, detectives began to piece together the chilling puzzle of the Raincoat Killer. They were faced with a series of baffling questions. Who was this murderer? What was their motive? And why did they always wear a raincoat? The Raincoat Killer left behind no fingerprints, no witnesses, and seemingly no connection between the victims. It was as if they were a ghost haunting the neighborhood. Our second victim was Harold Manning, an 81-year-old retired banker who enjoyed spending his golden years gardening. Just like Eleanor, Harold was lured into the killer's web of deception. The Raincoat Killer knocked on his door, appearing to be a lost traveler seeking shelter from the rain. In a cruel twist of fate, Harold's love for gardening would be his downfall. The killer used his gardening shears to end his life, leaving behind a bloody scene that horrified investigators. The most perplexing aspect of this case was the raincoat. Why did the killer always wear it, even on clear nights? Some believed it was a signature, a way of taunting the authorities. The raincoat became a symbol of terror in the community. Residents would tremble at the sight of anyone wearing a similar coat, fearing that the killer might strike again. With each murder, the pressure on the police grew. They knew they had a serial killer on their hands, but the Raincoat Killer was always one step ahead. The investigators worked tirelessly, sifting through every piece of evidence, analyzing surveillance footage, and conducting interviews. Yet, they struggled to find a lead that could bring them closer to the elusive killer. Our third victim was Margaret Sullivan, a 76-year-old retired schoolteacher known for her kindness and love for animals. Margaret's murder was particularly gruesome. The Raincoat Killer broke into her home, unleashing a horrifying scene that left investigators traumatized. As the body count continued to rise, the community lived in fear, and the pressure on the police grew exponentially. Despite the overwhelming challenges, the police were about to make a breakthrough that would take them closer to solving the case. They discovered a pattern that had eluded them for so long. The Raincoat Killer always struck during heavy rainstorms. It was as if they were drawn to the rain, using it as a cover for their crimes. This revelation gave investigators a glimmer of hope. They started monitoring weather patterns, hoping to predict when the killer would strike next. Our fourth victim was Thomas Hargrove, an 87-year-old retired doctor who had dedicated his life to saving others. Thomas was found brutally murdered in his home, and it seemed that the Raincoat Killer was growing bolder with each kill. The community was living in fear, and pressure mounted on the police to apprehend the killer before more lives were lost. As the investigation intensified, the police sought the assistance of renowned criminal profilers to build a psychological profile of the Raincoat Killer. The profilers believed that the killer's raincoat was a form of psychological armor, protecting them from the guilt and shame of their heinous acts. It was a shield that allowed them to continue their spree without remorse. This insight into the killer's psyche would prove crucial in narrowing down the list of suspects. Our fifth victim was Victoria Miller, a 79-year-old retired librarian who loved books and gardening. Victoria's murder sent shockwaves through the community. The Raincoat Killer seemed unstoppable, striking at will. The police were running out of time. They needed a breakthrough to put an end to the reign of terror. Just when it seemed that the Raincoat Killer would continue their rampage unchecked, a crucial piece of evidence emerged. During the investigation of Victoria Miller's murder, a witness reported seeing a suspicious individual near her house on the night of the crime. This was the first break in the case that the police had been waiting for. The witness described the individual as wearing a raincoat and acting strangely. Based on the witness's description, a composite sketch of the Raincoat Killer was created and released to the public. This sketch sent shockwaves through the community. People began reporting sightings of individuals matching the description, and the police followed up on every lead. The pressure was on, and the Raincoat Killer knew that their days were numbered. In a shocking turn of events, a tip from a vigilant neighbor led the police to a potential suspect. They arrested a man named James Keller, a 42-year-old loner who lived in the same neighborhood. James Keller had a history of mental health issues, and his erratic behavior had raised suspicions in the past. When the police searched his home, they found a raincoat that matched the description provided by the witness. The evidence against James Keller was circumstantial, but it was enough to place him under arrest and launch a thorough investigation. The trial of James Keller, the man accused of being the Raincoat Killer, was a media sensation. The entire community watched as the evidence was presented in court. The prosecution argued that James Keller's raincoat was the key piece of evidence linking him to the murders. They also presented the composite sketch and the witness's testimony. However, the defense argued that James Keller was mentally unstable and easily manipulated by the police. They claimed that the raincoat was a common item, and the witness's testimony was unreliable. The trial became a battle of wits, with the jury facing the difficult task of deciding James Keller's fate. After weeks of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. James Keller was found guilty of the murders of Eleanor Douglas, Harold Manning, Margaret Sullivan, Thomas Hargrove, and Victoria Miller. The community breathed a collective sigh of relief as the Raincoat Killer was finally brought to justice. James Keller was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the question remained, why did James Keller commit these heinous acts? What drove him to become the Raincoat Killer? In the aftermath of the trial, psychologists and experts delved into James Keller's psyche to understand the motive behind his gruesome crimes. It was revealed that James Keller had a troubled childhood marked by abuse and neglect. He grew up with a deep-seated resentment towards the wealthy, blaming them for his own misfortunes. This resentment festered over the years, eventually turning into a twisted desire for revenge. James Keller targeted wealthy seniors, viewing them as symbols of the privileged class that had eluded him. The raincoat, it turned out, was a symbol of anonymity for James Keller. It allowed him to hide his identity as he carried out his vengeful acts. The community was forever scared by the reign of terror inflicted by the Raincoat Killer. Families of the victims were left to grapple with the trauma and loss. In the wake of the tragedy, the neighborhood came together to support one another, vowing never to forget the lives that had been lost. The Raincoat Killer case serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in even the most idyllic communities. As we conclude our journey into the chilling case of the Raincoat Killer, we are left with haunting questions. What drives an individual to commit such heinous acts? How can a community heal from such trauma? The Raincoat Killer may be behind bars, but the scars left on the community are a lasting testament to the horrors that unfolded in that quiet neighborhood. Thank you for joining us on this unsettling journey. If you found this episode as riveting as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay updated on our latest true crime stories. Until next time, stay safe and always keep an eye out for the unsolved mysteries that surround us.